I've had friends talk to me about this upcoming election, tell me that they're not too happy with the choices, so they think they're just going to skip. I hope you don't. I hope you don't. I hope none of you in here skip election day this year. I hope you all turn out to the polls because we're all facing a very important election this November. Our choices are between someone who's been in politics for a very long time but the public doesn't know all that much about versus someone who's gone off the rails, completely tyrannical, and his only goal right now is to gain power, to have power and maintain that power. I'm talking, of course, about the North Carolina race for governor. So however you guys feel about the presidential race, I hope you guys turn out and vote in the governor race and all the local races you have going on. Because honestly, where we're at in the state, that's a lot more important. And that brings us to our first segment of the night. Our first in a new series until we get up to election day. We've got 4 more shows to election day. First in our new series, Get Rid of McCrory, or I Have Beef with Patty. Now, McCrory's been in the office for about 4 years now. He's had done several issues that have been somewhat vexing to me, somewhat frustrating to me. But what we're going to do until we get to our election, we're going to take a look at each of those issues. We're going to discuss them, we're going to talk about. But first we're going to decide which one we're going to talk about tonight. Let's take a look at our I Have Beef with Patty wheel. Alright, so up here we've got Amendment 1, which he was not in office for, but that was a ban on same-sex marriage that he supported before he got into office. The Syrian refugee ban, him endorsing Trump no matter what happens. We've got also on this wheel Medicaid, which is when he cut Medicaid and lost millions of dollars for people with Medicaid benefits. We also have House Bill 2, the coal ash bill, which he recently got rid of a committee that was going to look into it. A film tax incentive from when he got rid of 40,000 jobs in the state. Voter ID laws, and teacher salaries, which have just either frozen or shrunken in the past 4 years. So let's spin the wheel and see what we're going to talk about today. Voter ID laws. All right, so first issue up in our series of I Have Beef with Patty, we're going to talk about voter ID laws. Now, what's weird about this, what's important to know about this, voter ID laws that was passed in 2013, this said that it was required to have state official licenses, state official ID with you when you go to vote. Seems pretty innocuous. Most people have DMV licenses, most people have ID on them, but there was a very sinister intent to this, which was basically to freeze people out of voting. Before we go deeper into voter ID laws, let's take a quick look at the history of voting rights in North Carolina. All right, so we're going to start in 1865. That was when the Civil War ended. This is an important statistic because to this day, nobody has told the South. People still don't know. They're out there fighting to have Confederate flags waving from state houses and segregating schools. No one's told them yet. So this is important to note. Over 200 years ago, Civil War ended. 5 years later, after the 15th Amendment ratified, 15th Amendment said black men can vote. Why only black men? Because women at all could not vote yet for another 50 years. That's another big old pile of shit that we'll have to talk about later. But 15th Amendment, black people got the right to vote. It didn't mean anything at all, though, until nearly 100 years later, 1965. That's when the Voting Rights Act was passed. The Voting Rights Act is important because this is when we look at states that, even though the 15th Amendment had been ratified, were straight up not letting black people vote, or keeping them away from the polls, doing anything they can to discourage them from voting because they didn't want it to be a challenge to their power. So 1965 Voting Rights Act, which made it progressive, put a lot of federal control onto states that had discrimination in the past, that kept them from changing their voting rights laws. That was the case for 40 years until 2013 when the Supreme Court decided that things are better now. Racism is dead. We got a black president. Everything is great. There's no more racism. Everything's fine. We don't need the Voting Rights Act anymore. So Shelby County versus Holder, they got rid of the provision of in the Voting Rights Act that said that states needed federal approval before they changed voting laws. I kid you not, less than 2 months after that happened, North Carolina jumped on this immediately. McCrory signs voter ID laws in. Because this is very important, and I want you all to remember this. Anytime anyone that is in power has the ability to stay in power and has permission to discriminate and stay in power, that's exactly what they're going to do. So as soon as Shelby County versus Holder gets on, General Assembly gets rolling, recording gets rolling, voter ID laws go into effect less than 2 months later. All right, next slide. What's the voter ID laws? Now, this is a group of laws that basically made it harder and more difficult for young people, for black people, to go to the polls to vote. Now, why is that important? Because black people tend to vote Democratic. It's a weird monolith of a trend, largely because, you know, Democrats aren't trying to keep them from voting, I guess. I guess that's what my guess is on why that happened. So, requiring a form of state-issued ID, most people have that. That's the thing, most people have any form of state-issued ID except for public assistance cards, because black people have those. And if you have a public assistance card, you can't vote. All right. And then also got rid of same-day registration, early voting, got up to 7 days of early voting, and getting it out of precinct voting, basically made it harsher on absentee voting. Now, this law, good news is, these laws were struck down by the 4th Appeal Circuit Court about 3 days ago. They were struck down by the court. Judge Diana Motz said the new provisions target African Americans with almost surgical precision. Now, they get rid of all these laws because they find out that the intent to get rid of them is voter fraud. The only reason that anyone had these laws in effect was they said, well, we need IDs to make sure people aren't voting on behalf of other people. People are going to the polls multiple times. Only problem with that, that's not a thing that exists. That's never happened. It's like they're solving a problem that never happened. It's like if an exterminator showed up at your house and was like, all right, what we're going to do, we're going to lay down some TNT. We're just going to blow the whole thing up because there's a chance you might have an infestation of Smurfs. There's a chance there's some Smurfs in the foundation. We're just going to blow the whole house down. Yes, they do get everywhere. More importantly, they don't exist. So let's not solve a problem that doesn't exist. All right, so they're saying targeting African Americans almost surgical precision. How do we know this? Next slide. They found out that before they enacted these laws, they straight up asked, how do black people vote? They straight up saying they asked for a survey on what ways black people vote, and as soon as they got those answers back, they went ahead and made all of those ways illegal. Now, they said they got these answers from a survey. My suspicion is it wasn't really a survey. I think they just listened to an old 90s Def Jam bit on white people vote like, black people vote like from back in the day. And then they made their rules from there. I actually have a clip from that. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll take a listen to that clip. Anybody in here ever noticed that white people vote different than black people? I'm not saying one's better, one's worse, but white people and black people sure do vote differently, don't they? You ever notice that white people vote on election day? Black people don't do that, do they? No, white people be voting on election day. They be taking work off. They be taking long lunch breaks. Like, boss, I'm going to be late coming back from lunch today because I have to go vote. Get a little sticker on their chest saying they voted. Anybody ever notice that shit? White people be voting on election day. Not black people. Black people, we like to vote early. We like to vote somewhere between the 7 days before election day, get in there real early, vote outside of our own precinct. You ever notice how black people be doing that? You ever notice how black people be late for everything except voting early? Speaking of being late for everything, you ever notice that when black people go to vote early, they like to register on the same day? White people won't do that. No, white people go ahead, they register ahead of time, they take work off, vote on election day. Not black people. One stop for us, please. We gonna register and vote at the same time because we like one stop. That's why we get our chicken and waffles from the same place. Am I right? I know I'm right. I'm right. Anybody ever notice that? Everybody ever notice that white people always vote inside their own precinct too? Like white people be carrying their own state-issued ID that's not a public assistance card and going in and voting with their driver's license inside their own precinct. Not black people. We ain't carrying driver's licenses around. What am I going to have a driver's license for? We finally just started being allowed to sit in the front of the bus 30 years ago. Because this is the 90s right now. Anybody ever notice that? Ever notice that we don't be carrying driver's licenses around? Man. Alright, I see I'm getting the light, so I'm only going to talk to you guys for another 40 minutes. What is it with women in shopping? Alright, so that's Eddie Tucker. I think that's all the General Assembly listen to. They listen to that and like, oh, that's how black people be voting. They're going to get rid of all those ways. All right, next slide. Now, Fourth Appeal struck down, said that the laws were unconstitutional, they were racist, they were unconstitutional. They got rid of them this week, but McCrory is fighting back. McCrory has said, voter IDs are required to purchase Sudafed, cash a check, board an airplane, or enter a federal courtroom. True, these are all things that require photo ID. Here's the difference between those things and voting. There's a reason for this. It's necessary to show how old you are before you get Sudafed. It's necessary to make sure that when you're cashing a check, it's your check. These are cases of fraud that have been proven, there have been issues for this. This was the way to solve those. Voter ID, voter fraud, the problem they're solving with ID, virtually never happens. In the past 16 years, with over 1 billion ballots cast, there's only been 31 cases of voter fraud. 31 out of over 1 billion. Can we take a look at that percentage? That's less than 100 millionth of a percent. If voter fraud happened 100 million more times, it wouldn't even equal 1% of all the votes that are cast. This is solving a problem that doesn't exist, largely to keep black people from voting, because black people are not going to vote for McCrory or for the people in the GA, keep them in power. Now, McCrory's going to fight this. He says he's going to appeal this. He's going to appeal this. Only problem with that, his attorney general is the guy that's running against him in November, and he's not touching it. He's not touching this case. He's not defending it. Because if you're a lawyer and a court says, if a court says, hey, this law is unconstitutional and racist, you don't want to have to be the lawyer that stands in front of them and goes, nuh-uh. So the Attorney General is not touching this. So McCrory is now defending this bill so viciously, that he is hiring lawyers from outside of the state to come in, spending taxpayer money to hire outside attorneys to come defend this law, just like he's doing with House Bill 2 right now, spending taxpayer money to come in and defend discriminatory laws that he's put in place. So this is who we have in power right now. We have a man who is willing to put in laws that exclude people, that disenfranchise people, solely for the purpose of maintaining a grip of power, maintaining allegiance to his donors, to everyone in his party. He's willing to keep people out, freeze people out, so that way he can stay in charge. And he's willing to spend the money that you pay and take state taxes to keep that going. Even when the courts look at him and tell him that what he's doing is morally wrong and legally impossible, he's spending your taxpayer money to keep it going. Last slide. And that's why we need to get rid of McCrory this November. Thank you.